Today's session, we are going to be talking about artificial and alternative sweeteners. I'm super excited for this topic, really excited to differentiate what these things are for everyone. And so if you're here, go ahead and introduce yourself to the group. Let us know what you're chatting from or where you're chatting from and what your connection to diabetes is. But today I want to talk to you about exploring alternative sweeteners just for overall health and a healthier diet, healthier lifestyle. And really in our quest for a healthier lifestyle, many of us are looking to alternatives for traditional sugars because we're trying to balance our blood sugars. We're trying to make sure that our blood sugars stay even. And that's where alternative sweeteners come in. And these sweeteners are a great way to satisfy our sweet tooth without the negative effects of refined sugars, like we find in lots and lots of the products that we eat and lots of the products that are around. So, hey to everybody who's joining. Thank you so much for being here. I always try and make these a quick session so they're not too long. So hopefully you can stick around. And I see that Katie's here. I see Kylene's here. Lynn is here. Lynn, you're from Spring. You live like 30-ish minutes north of me. So nice to meet you. Nice to see you. Glad you're here. Just to give you an idea, Cal's here too. Hi, Cal. Good to see you. And say hi to Andy for me. Andy is Cal's very adorable dog. If you're new here and you haven't met me before, my name is Mila. I'm a diabetes patient advocate and integrative nutrition diabetes health coach. I wrote a book. I live with latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, and I started this community because I wanted people to feel, one, like they weren't alone in a diabetes diagnosis, but two, that we don't have to feel the stigma and the shame that comes with a diabetes diagnosis. And so in this community of Glucose Guide and on my website, hangrywoman.com, we cover topics like diabetes management, cooking, self-care, all of that kind of stuff, all of that fun stuff. I also want to let all of you know I'm hosting a group coaching session this Saturday. It is free. Anyone can join it. The first 50 people who join are going to be able to access the room. You can choose to be on camera or not. And it's going to be just like a really fun time to get grounded, to talk about some of the things that we're going through and for you guys to get an additional coaching experience. I plan on doing those one Saturday a month as a way to give back to all of you, but also just as a way to offer some space to anybody who feels like they need it. And for all of you, you are in the Glucose Guide community now. I consider this like your personal diabetes assistant. So it's a place to connect, a place to find community, helps you with self-care, mental health, and living your best life with diabetes. You can also sign up for private coaching if that's something that you would like. Private coaching is $30 per session. I'm trying to make it as accessible as possible. And Kai asked what time the group session will be on Saturday. That's going to be at 1 p.m. Central Time. So adjust for your time zones. But we'll have private coaching, group coaching circles like Saturdays. I also made it an event here in the Glucose Guide community. So if you go to the events and office hours tab, you can RSVP to the office hours session on Saturday, and it'll send you a reminder as well. Be sure that if you like the app, if you're finding just a lot of value in the app, that you go ahead and give it a review on the App Store and Google Play Store. Super helpful to me and just helps other people know what they can look forward to when they're here from your perspective. And then for today's session, just make sure to stay on mute, use the chat box, ask questions, react to the things that you like, add your commentary. If you're watching this from web, you can hover over people's comments and react to them. It's really fun. Like, it's a very interactive session. So just have fun with it. Talk to other people in the chat as you're listening. It just makes the time so much more fun. You can also ask me questions in there or raise your hand. So if you're having a question you want me to pay attention to, you can raise your hand. I'll look in the chat box, make sure to answer your question. And then in today's session, what we're going to be talking about is alternative sweeteners. We're going to talk about how you can make healthier choices with alternative sweeteners, what these sweeteners do to blood sugar levels, and how you can use them in cooking and baking, and some of the pros and cons of each of the different sweeteners. So we're going to go through just a few today. And first, I wanted to start off with alternative sweeteners versus artificial sweeteners, because there is a difference and they are extremely different. And today we're talking about sugar alternatives and not artificial sweeteners. So when we're talking about alternative sweeteners, we're talking about natural or plant-based sweeteners that are used as a substitute for sugar. So they're often derived from sources like plants or fruits or other natural substances, fibrous roots, things like that. And they provide sweetness without high calorie or glycemic impact like traditional sugars. So what you'll see is that they taste sweet, but when you use them in cooking or baking, or you add some to your tea or things like that, things that you could replace with sugar, you'll notice that your blood sugars are not going to rise, usually at all, with some of those alternative sweeteners. And on the other hand, and I just wanted to define this in the beginning because it's really helpful to just kind of the overall conversation. But artificial sweeteners, on the other hand, are synthetic sugar substitutes, and they're created through chemical processes usually. So they are intensely sweet, but they usually contain little to no calories. And they're often used in things like diet sodas, sugar-free products, and other processed foods. And so the difference is that alternative sweeteners usually undergo minimal processing in trying to create them. For example, stevia is taken from the stevia leaf and stevia plant, and it's just an extraction process. Monk fruit, kind of similar. Erythritol, similar. They're all just extractions, whereas artificial sweeteners go through a lot more complex processing methods, and they're usually chemically created. So when you think of things like Sweet and Low or Equal, things like that, those are aspartame, saccharin, sucralose, those kinds of synthetically created sugar substitutes are just different. They're just differently created. Not necessarily one is good or bad, but one is just synthetically created, one is naturally derived. So I think that's really helpful when thinking about the differences between all of those different sweeteners. And so when we think of the common alternatives versus the artificial, and I love how badly I spelled artificial there. But we're thinking about, for alternatives, stevia, monk fruit, erythritol, xylitol, allulose. When we're thinking of artificial, we're thinking aspartame, saccharin, sucralose. And so I'm curious, and we're going to get into kind of each of the individual alternatives in just a second. But I'm curious, and I would love for you guys to leave in the chat box what types of alternative or artificial sweeteners do you typically like to use, or that you typically use for baking or cooking. There is no judgment here, one versus the other. It is absolutely up to you. And that's what I'll say in this whole entire conversation is you don't have to use alternative sweeteners or artificial sweeteners if you don't want to. If you want to use actual sugar, you absolutely have the right and the ability to do that. It's mainly just thinking, what's this going to do to my blood sugar? And how can I mitigate the spike that comes from using some of these sweeteners? So put in the chat box what kind of sweeteners are typical for you to use in your cooking or baking. And I would love to hear that. It's always really interesting to see kind of what other people are doing, which is the value of having this conversation. For me, my favorite is stevia, and I tend to use stevia quite a bit. I bake with it, I cook with it. I love adding it, like if I'm going to make like a sweet tea or a sweet drink. Sometimes I'll combine stevia with regular sugar just to have kind of like a half and half effect. And it just depends on like the application and how I'm using it. So love hearing that you guys have your preferences, which is really cool. So Abby mentioned that she uses honey, love honey. Cal mentioned he uses monk fruit or dates. That's a great natural sweetener. And monk fruit actually comes from dates, which is really cool. Stevia is Valerie's. Kai says she uses regular sugar for baking, but something for teas, stevia. Yeah, stevia is great for warm drinks and teas. Lynn said she uses monk fruit. So it's really cool. We have like a good diversity in what everyone tends to use and what everyone really likes. And so for like some common uses for alternative sweeteners, like the ones that we're all talking about, stevia, monk fruit, erythritol, xylitol, and allulose. These are often used in lots of foods, beverages, baked goods, sometimes even condiments. You can find some of those used in like sugar-free barbecue sauce or ketchup or things like that. And then artificial sweeteners like aspartame, saccharin, and sucralose are prevalent in sugar-free products, diet sodas. I think like I've seen it in candy, all those kinds of things. So all of these different types of sweeteners are used to sweeten foods without extra calories or sugar. And just to clarify as well, when it comes to artificial sweeteners, research is kind of inconclusive about like whether the long-term effects are good or bad. Some studies say it's fine. Some studies say it's detrimental. Kind of depends on who's funding the study, right? So while those artificial sweeteners may contain low calories and they're a good alternative for sugar, the effects on long-term health are unclear. And so opt for natural alternatives whenever possible, but artificial alternatives are also not terrible, not terribly bad. Ultimately, you just want to keep track of your health, understand your own considerations, and work with your care team to determine what's going to be the best outcome for you. So we're going to talk about each individual type of natural sweetener and talk about their pros and cons. And so we're going to start with stevia because I think it's one of the most used, most commonly used. It's the one that's definitely been around the longest of all of the alternatives. And it's derived from the stevia plant. So it's known for being intensely sweet, but it doesn't cause any spikes in blood sugar levels. It's an ideal choice for people who are watching their blood sugars or calorie intake. And it's a popular sweetener that has gotten a lot of attention in the recent years, especially as foods have become more sugar-free conscious and people are looking for those like fewer calories added kind of foods and meals. It's become a really, really good alternative to sugar. And so stevia itself comes from the leaves of the stevia plant. It's native to Paraguay and Brazil. This is probably way more information than you want to know, but it's kind of cool knowing where these things come from. And it's been used for hundreds of years in South America for its sweet taste and its medicinal properties. You can get stevia seeds and grow stevia yourself and use it as a sweetener. It's actually pretty cool. Like when you pull the leaves off of the plant, you can chew the leaves and it tastes sweet. It's pretty awesome. But it wasn't until the 1970s that Japan began commercially adopting stevia as a sweetener. And so the popularity has gained steam ever since. And so for those of us managing diabetes and regulating our blood glucose levels, the research suggests that stevia doesn't raise glucose or insulin levels like sugar does. And so it makes it a really appealing option for people with diabetes who want to enjoy sweet flavors, but don't want the associated spike in blood sugar. And so some of the pros of using stevia are that it's low glycemic index. So unlike regular sugar, it has a glycemic index of 0, so it will not spike your blood sugars. For weight management, as a zero-calorie sweetener, it can help people maintain a healthy weight, which is beneficial in managing diabetes. And then it's of natural origin. So it's derived from a plant. It's considered a natural sweetener, which people prefer over alternative and artificial sweeteners. But the cons of using stevia are just a few. So despite its benefits, there are some minor side effects. And I think this is true. We're going to see this with all of the different types of sweeteners that we'll explore today. And so if you eat too much, you can have bloating, nausea. Sometimes there's a lingering aftertaste. Sometimes for people who have too much stevia, they start to get a bitter taste in their mouth because it is 100 times sweeter than sugar. So it tends to actually end up tasting a little bit bitter because it has such intensity in its sweetness. So some people do find that there is an aftertaste with it. Also, for purity purposes, not all stevia products are created equal. And so some may be mixed with other sweeteners or might not be pure stevia. So it's super important to read labels for things that you buy just to make sure that it is stevia that you're using. One of the brands that I love most for stevia is Truvia. They constantly have their products like down. They also have different mixes, which I really love. So they have like a stevia monk fruit mix, a stevia erythritol mix. They have pure stevia. And so I always know that I'm going to get a consistent product when I use Truvia. It's just one of my favorites. I develop recipes for them all the time and I love their stuff. It's 1-to-1 in your cooking and baking. So you don't ever have to worry about having to do complex measurements to make it work in your food. It's really important to choose quality brands and make sure that overall you're just choosing a brand that produces stevia in the right way. And then just remember that because stevia is much, much sweeter than sugar, you sometimes need less of it to achieve the same sweetness as sugar. So stevia is a great option. It is completely natural, and it's also very cool that you can grow it yourself. And then xylitol is another sweetener that's worth mentioning. So it has a similar taste to sugar. It doesn't have no calories, but it does have fewer calories, but it does have minimal impact on our blood sugar levels. And it doesn't promote tooth decay like regular sugar does, which is really great. And something that's really interesting about xylitol is it's derived from the fibrous parts of plants. So it's a great sugar substitute that offers like this really good host of benefits. Xylitol is what we would call a sugar alcohol. So you'll see sugar alcohol listed on your nutrition label underneath carbohydrates. So what you'll see is total carbohydrates, you'll see fiber, you'll see sugar, and then you'll see sugar alcohols listed out on the nutrition label. And so it's just as sweet as table sugar, but it has 40% less calories than table sugar does. So it makes it an attractive option for people who are looking to reduce their sugar intake and not sacrifice sweetness, but also to have just a little bit of that closer to regular sugar taste. And so one of the most significant benefits of xylitol, like I mentioned before, is its impact on dental health. So unlike sugar, which feeds harmful bacteria in your mouth and between your gums and your teeth and leading to tooth decay, xylitol actually inhibits those bacteria. And so it makes it a really popular ingredient in sugar-free chewing gum and mints. That's one place that you might find it. Xylitol has a low glycemic index, meaning it doesn't cause a rapid spike in blood sugar. It also makes it a really good sweetener for people with diabetes and people trying to manage their blood sugar levels. Okay, and then in terms of digestion, so xylitol as a sugar alcohol gets processed a little bit differently than sugar. It's not fully broken down in the stomach, so it provides fewer calories and has less impact on blood sugar levels, even though it does have a slight glycemic index. One of the potential downsides of xylitol, consuming large amounts, again, can lead to digestive issues, gas, bloating, diarrhea. The side effects are typically temporary and can be mitigated by slowly introducing xylitol into your diet. but there's also a risk of overconsumption because it is lower in calories and it doesn't raise blood sugars as much. It can be easy to eat too much of it. So just remember that while it is a healthy alternative, it still should be used in moderation. You still need to observe serving sizes when you're using it. Some recommendations for starting to use it and where to find it. Start with small amounts, gradually increase it as your body gets used to it. And then you can use it just as you would in regular sugar. So you could use it in your coffee, in your tea, in your baking. But you also want to, again, read labels because some brands combine xylitol with other sweeteners or with artificial sweeteners, and that could cause digestive issues as well. That also can make you unintentionally eat something that you might not want to. Like if you're looking to xylitol to have it as an artificial or have it as an alternative sweetener, you don't want artificial sweeteners with it. And so super, super important to just be able to read those labels and understand. Xylitol does not have an aftertaste, which is really nice. It tastes pretty close to sugar. It is not safe for pets. So if you have pets around, it's very important that you're conscious and you are not spilling xylitol on the floor so that they can lick it up, because it does have a toxic effect in dogs and cats specifically. And then allulose is one of my favorites. So allulose is derived from figs, raisins, dates. It's really, really a cool kind of sweetener, and also very interesting just in terms of the way that it's digested and the way that it works. So allulose, like I said, occurs naturally in fruits like figs, raisins, and dates. It's 70% as sweet as sugar, which means that you get almost the same sweetness with fewer calories, and that's like a pretty good win-win. Something else that I really like about allulose, and it's just kind of fun. I have a recipe for like a caramel that you can drizzle, and it's made with allulose, and it literally just takes browning some allulose and then adding a splash of cream to it, and you get this like amazing tasting caramel, but it has no sugar. It's like, it's the wildest thing. I'll have to post it after with this presentation, but it's pretty cool. It's an awesome recipe, and it doesn't take very long to make it happen. And it's like so surprising that it browns enough to make it like a sticky caramel. It's very cool. So some of the benefits of allulose are that it's low in calories. So again, if you're watching weight, great for that. It also can promote weight loss in some studies. And so along with that, promoting weight loss, it has reduced blood sugar levels in people and even improved liver health in some studies. And allulose doesn't just have a low glycemic index itself, but it also slows down the digestion of other high GI foods. And so if you're trying to manage your blood sugars overall and you really love baking, allulose is a great sweetener to use in baking, because it's going to kind of mitigate that GI spike in like regular all-purpose flour or bread flour, things like that. So I think that's pretty cool that it also lowers the glycemic index of other foods. On the other side, some of the drawbacks, the same as all the other alternatives, is that it may cause digestive issues if you eat too much of it. And allulose is safe to eat in moderation, but there's not a lot of studies on its long-term effects. So listen to your body, consult with your healthcare provider. Those are great ways to make sure that you are still staying safe, you are still eating things that you love, but those long-term effects are just not known at this point. And then monk fruit. So monk fruit is, I think, one sweetener that is worth exploring. And it's just really interesting because monk fruit is a tiny round fruit. So you can see it here. It's a tiny round fruit and it's native to southern China. And usually it's used in herbal medicine. So it's been kind of like a medicinal remedy for decades, centuries. But in recent years, it's become popular as a natural sweetener as we've been trying to find ways to remove sugar from our diets. And so the sweetness of monk fruit comes from compounds called mogrosides, I think is how you say it. And it can make the monk fruit up to 250 times sweeter than regular sugar. And so one of the key like attractions of using monk fruit as a sweetener, low calorie content, there's low calories. It makes a really good choice for people looking to reduce their calorie intake. It's rich in antioxidants. And so antioxidants are substances that help protect your cells against free radicals, unstable molecules, and other pathogens that can cause damage to your body over time. And so monk fruit, it's suggested that monk fruit has beneficial effects on those free radicals, as well as on blood sugar levels. But again, it's a relatively new use for monk fruit, so there aren't a lot of studies on the long-term effects. And monk fruit also has a little bit of a different taste than regular sugar, which could take some getting used to, especially because it's not necessarily, depending on the concentration, as sweet as sugar. And then I just saw on the side that Katie said she made lemonade one time with allulose and it made her tum-tum hurt. And I think that's so true of all of these types of sweeteners, is that you really want to use these in moderation. So because these are 0 calorie and they're not going to raise your blood sugar, it's not necessarily licensed to use more. You really, really, really want to be conscious of what you're putting into the recipes you're developing, or what you're putting into the teas that you're drinking, or lemonade. Katie is a great example. Alternative sweeteners sometimes need just a little bit of balance. And you've probably noticed, like, even with like sugar-free candy, a lot of them won't raise your blood sugar, but what you notice is that if you overeat them, you'll get those gastrointestinal effects. You'll get that rumbly tummy. You'll have to you might have diarrhea, you might have gas, or like painful bloating. So it's really important to know these are great, 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 great things in moderation. And they are just tools to help us be able to enjoy the foods and enjoy the things that we like to enjoy while still being able to balance our blood sugars. So super important to keep that in mind, because you definitely can get the tummy rumblies when you're overusing some of these products. And so it's really important to create that balance. And there's also nothing that says you can't take, a half monk fruit, half regular granulated sugar, and use that as a way to cut down on the full amount of sugar, but still get the sweetness and still get the sweet taste. There's no rule that says you can't do something like that. So it's okay to mix and match, to blend them together, to do different blends. I think I had mentioned earlier, Truvia does some really interesting different blends. So they have like regular stevia, but then they also have like a stevia monk fruit, a stevia erythritol. So they're, blending and mixing and matching to find whatever works best for your taste is okay. But also know that if you are eating these things without moderation, it does have those gastrointestinal effects that is pretty gross. And then Cal mentioned that for him, stevia has an aftertaste. And I think that's also true of a lot of these sweeteners, is that you kind of have to find the one that your taste buds adapt to the most and adapt to the best. For some people, stevia tastes really bitter and it's kind of gross. For some people, it tastes just like regular sugar. For some people, monk fruit isn't sweet enough. So it's really about kind of balancing, finding out what works for you and what works best. And then the last one we're going to talk about is erythritol. And so erythritol is also really interesting. It is a type of carbohydrate known as a sugar alcohol. So you'll find it again, just like monk fruit, listed under total carbohydrates, fiber, and then you'll see sugar alcohol. So erythritol is a type of sugar alcohol. People tend to say that sugar alcohols are net carbs. We'll probably do a session on net carbs versus total carbs at some point because I have opinions. But erythritol is a sugar alcohol, and it's usually found in fruits and fermented foods. It's often used as a low-calorie sweetener. And so it's about 70% as sweet as sugar as well. And it contains virtually no calories. So it's a great choice. It comes in both powdered or confectioner's form and comes in granulated form. So you can use both, which are really nice. It does have a cooling effect for some people. I know that has happened with me. And if you've tried erythritol, brands like Swerve or Bake Believe, things like that, it tends to have it feels almost minty. So that can be something that is a little bit of a turnoff to people, but it doesn't raise your blood sugars, and it makes it just a great potential option for people with diabetes. There are some drawbacks. Of course, there's always drawbacks to everything, pros and cons. So consuming large amounts, again, digestive issues and bloating. And then some people, like I mentioned before, with like the cooling effect, might find that it has a different aftertaste, which does take some getting used to. And then a recent study kind of linked erythritol, which is an ingredient in some stevia blends, to an increased risk of heart attack and stroke. But the sample size wasn't quite diverse enough to really say that that was the intended effect or that was the whole effect. And so there's more research that has to be done to understand the potential risks of erythritol itself. So it's really, again, check in on yourself, like really take stock and of note of how you're feeling after you work with these things and add these things. But knowing, as people with diabetes, we are at an increased risk of heart attack and stroke just by nature of our chronic illness. And so, we want to be as safe as possible when we're deciding to introduce some of these alternatives into our diets. And so just super important to feel it out, pay attention, make sure that you feel okay. And then, all of us should be going to the doctor at the very least annually, but every 3 to 6 months, being able to get checked on and see our doctors, our specialists. It's always super helpful to understanding how we're progressing and how well we are managing diabetes and what we might need to change. And so it's all about making informed choices. So when you're using these artificial sweeteners, there are like endless possibilities. You can use them in baking and cooking and your favorite beverages, but you want to experiment with ratios and recipes. And that can lead to creating just like good, healthier versions of treats that you already love. You know that I provide recipes here. And so you can always, if there's a recipe that I post and it does have sugar in it, but you want to use an alternative, use your favorite alternative. That's great. I will always specify when I use an alternative in a recipe, just so you know, but you can always swap it for something that you love. And then I would love for you guys to share your tips in the chat box section again. Just anything that you feel like really helps you when thinking about using sugar substitutes, or any ways that you use them yourself. But alternative sweeteners provide us a way to enjoy sweetness in our diets without the negative effects of refined sugar, which can be increased glucose, which can be weight gain, which can be an increase of risk of heart attack and stroke, all of those things. And so the alternative sweeteners do give us a greater range of options and can suit different preferences, especially when it comes to dietary needs. Always remember, moderation is key. It's always best to consult with your healthcare provider if you have any concerns, and just make sure that you're checking in, you're understanding how you're feeling, and that you understand how some of these different alternatives can affect you. But I really appreciate y'all joining today and giving your attention to this. And I hope you found this informative. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. And just remember that small changes always help toward just building a healthier lifestyle. And those small changes make a big overall impact. And so everything that you're doing, everything that you are learning about living with diabetes, that is all so, so, so important. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so that you guys can see me. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat box and I'll walk through and answer them. If you don't have any questions, which is totally okay, then I'll end the session and you can always message me in the Glucose Guide app. You can always ask me questions. I'm here for you. That is why this app exists. It's why it's here. And so I just want to be a good source of support for you and make sure that you feel good about what you're doing with diabetes. So I don't see any questions in the sidebar box. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to end our live session. Thank you so much for everyone who is here. There will be a replay of this in the resources section. So as soon as this session is over, I'll get it downloaded. I will add captions and then you guys will be able to watch it whenever you'd like and revisit it whenever you need. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the Glucose Guide app anywhere and ask the community, or you can message me directly. And that's it for today. I'll see you guys next Tuesday. It'll almost be Thanksgiving, which is so exciting. So see you guys then. Bye.